Brexit has happened and Britain has left the European Union. But negotiations will now begin on what that future relationship should look like. And what should it be, particularly for a city like London that voted very heavily to remain inside? Well, my guest this week is the mayor of that city, the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who joins me in our studio here in Brussels. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. First of all, you're in Brussels talking to lots of politicians about a so-called associate citizenship of the EU because, of course, since Britain has left, they are no longer British people members of the EU, citizens of the EU. What is associate citizenship?
Well, many of your viewers may not realise, but actually there are millions of Londoners and those around the country who are heartbroken that we've left the European Union. At the end of this year, we'll have left the single market, and so we'll lose the free movement that we have around the European Union. One of the things that does exist, it goes back to the Maastricht Treaty, is this concept of EU citizenship. And one of the points I've been making to senior politicians in Brussels is even though we've left the EU, even though it's probable we'll be leaving the single market at the end of this year, is it possible for those of us who want to keep connected to the European Union to have a form of associated citizenship? And what that means basically is, look, I accept we won't get the same privileges that we had when we were members of the European Union because we'll have left the single market. We can't have free movement of people, of goods, of services, of capital. What there can be going forward, though, is a relationship between those of us who want to stay part of Europe and the European Union through an associated citizenship. So we could, for example, move around Europe. We could, if we wanted to, study in Europe. We could work in Europe and enjoy the benefits of the European Union.
But you know what, some people are saying that this is simply a gimmick. It's not going to work. It involves treaty change. That's not going to happen. As as one EU politician said, the proposal's not serious. It's not. It's a kind of pipe dream.
Well, look, we want to plant the seed in the minds not just of the British government. I've written to Boris Johnson yesterday to say to him when he starts negotiations in March in earnest, to discuss with the EU the possibility of an associated citizenship. I accept we'll leave the single market. I accept my government doesn't want to have free movement of people. I accept there are challenges in relation to reciprocity. But also I wanted to speak to European politicians to explain to them that there are many of us who have tried without success to find an Irish relation or an Italian relation or a Polish relation to keep a European passport. We've not been able to do so. And is there another way for us to keep our relationship with the European Union?
Looking at the long term, and just finally on Brexit, realistically, given where public opinion is now, given the fact that Britain has left and that relationship may well take years to sort out, are you now reconciled to the fact that Britain's not going to probably rejoin the EU for, at least a generation?
Honestly, I think in the short to medium term, there's no possibility of us rejoining the European Union. That's why I say to my friends who voted to leave, and that includes the government, we've got to work together to make Brexit a success. In the short to medium term, we've got to make sure it's as successful as it can be. I don't think it'll be as successful as being a member of the EU. In the long term, who knows? Look, I'm of the generation who grew up seeing our European neighbours as our friends, as our allies, members of our family. My parents' generations grew up looking at our European neighbours with suspicion. What I don't want is my children to grow up going back to the bad old days where we saw the French as somebody with suspicion, or the Germans. I want our children to look upon them as our friends and our family as well. And it's really for, the medium to long term to discuss and debate whether we decide to rejoin. But in the short to medium term, I think we've left the EU.
Now, when you first got elected, almost 4 years ago, you were the first, I think, Muslim mayor of any major Western city. And there's been great strides in certain parts of Europe when it comes to race relations and relations with people from different religions. But it seems not in the EU institutions. If you look at the European Parliament, for example, less than 3%, and it's got worse since Britain left, of MEPs are non-white. The entire EU Commission is white. Do you think the EU is as not concerned about race as, let's say, Britain, for example, is?
I think if you go around Europe, not just my country, if you go around Europe, many Europeans do feel a disconnect between the institutions, the structure of the European Union and the peoples. And one example of this is the European Union doesn't look like us. I'm a European. I've got people who look like me in France, in Spain, in Italy, in Germany. We are a continent that's quite diverse now. We're quite diverse in relation to ethnicity, in relation to religion, in relation to sexual orientation, in relation to those who are disabled. And I'm not sure the European Union, those in positions of power and influence, properly reflect the society we are now in 2020. One of the things that EU's got to realise is unless it adapts and evolves to keep abreast with the pace of change in Europe, it will be even more alienated from those people whose confidence it needs to survive.
Now, it's fair to say, I think you've had a few run-ins with the President of the United States, Donald Trump.
The current one.
The current one via Twitter. Well, that's my point. My point is, essentially, it's looking possible, possibly even likely, that he will win in November for another 4 years. You may well win in your mayoral race later on this year as well. Do you regret that the relationship is quite as bad between you and him?
I'm quite clear that the UK and the USA have a special relationship. A special relationship means our expectations of each other are different from what they are of other countries. It's like having a best friend. You expect more from your best friend than you do of acquaintances or just casual strangers. And the point about having a special relationship is, of course, you stand with them at times of adversity, shoulder to shoulder, but you call them out when you think they are wrong. And I think when I look around the world, I see the rise of populist nativist movements. I see leaders trying to divide people rather than unite them. You've got to call them out. And I think Donald Trump, in relation to what he said about people who are gay, people who are Mexican, people who are Muslim, women, are things that I disagree with, and I'm not afraid to call him out on them.
But my point is, if neither you or him are going away, the UK and the EU want a trade deal with the United States. The United States seems to want a trade deal with both blocs now as well. Looking ahead, would it not be better if you guys try to get on a little bit better?
Oh, listen, I've said to Donald Trump, I'm more than happy to take him around London, to introduce him to women who are his equal, to Muslims who are proud to be Western and Muslim, to introduce him to members of the LGBTQ plus community who I think should be treated the same as those who aren't. I'm more than happy to take him around London and take him around mosques and synagogues to explain to him that it's possible to be both a Muslim and British, is possibly a proud Westerner and a proud member of the Islamic faith.
Right, finally, it's our quick fire round. You can only choose one, so there's no prevaricating on this one. Either or, essentially. And speaking of that, Donald Trump or Vladimir Putin?
Pass.
You're only allowed one pass. Burgundy passports or blue passports?
Oh, Burgundy all day long.
Merkel or Macron?
Oh, really good one that is. I mean, I've met Macron, I've not met Merkel, and I think he's a really good, interesting, progressive guy, proud European, and I was really impressed when I met him.
So we're going to go for Macron on that. Chips or frites or waffles?
I'm a chips man.
Sadiq Khan, thank you very much indeed.